Hello, and welcome to the Accountability Coach podcast, where we discuss proven business success principles related to helping you make more money and work less so you can enjoy having your ideal business and your ideal life. This is Bachrach. Today we have a special guest with us who I know you will find to be a wealth of information related to providing his insightful wisdom to helping you improve your communication so you can have the perfect conversation that ultimately leads to additional business for you. Communication is so important in everything that we do. Jake Stahl is a pioneer in conversational dynamics and a highly regarded fractional chief learning officer. He is revolutionizing sales through his Adaptive Conversational Blueprint, turning sales professionals into relational architects, capable of foregoing profound connections with prospects. Integral to his approach is the 20-10 rule, which challenges traditional perspectives on conversation and emphasizes the importance of rhythm and cadence. With a rich background spanning 30 years, Jake has shared his expertise in training and development across 6 countries, impacting well over 10,000 people. Welcome, Jake. We really appreciate you joining us.
It's a real honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
You know, for all of us to be on the same page, what exactly is a fractional chief learning officer, and how does it differ from a chief revenue officer or even a VP of sales?
Yeah, great question. So the fractional chief learning officer is a fancy name for a fractional head of training and development. So my role is to get the salespeople off to a good start by creating an onboarding program to help them come aboard. And then it's to teach them how to sell effectively on the phones. Because once they dial out, that's kind of where my training kicks in. The way it differs from a vice president of sales or a chief revenue officer is that they're the ones that normally set the cadence, and they set the revenue goals, and they set what they want their reps to do and who to call and what those demographics look like. I've occasionally run into CROs or vice presidents of sales that train their own people, but it's usually not in their wheelhouse. So I let them go on with their duties of making sure the company hits goals, and then I take over in making sure that happens once the phones light up.
Okay, so how would what you're doing help us as small business owners and entrepreneurs?
Well, there's 2 ways. The first is I coach entrepreneurs all the time, and one of the things I always hear is, Jake, I'm not a salesperson. I have trouble selling myself or my services. So one of the ways is I help coach people on how to create their elevator pitches, how to talk to an investor when they're looking to get investors in their business, or how to talk about new products. Inside the business, you typically have people that man the counters or man the phones. I've even worked with waitresses in restaurants. And what I do with them is I help them create the messages that make the most impact. So how do you get the most of your conversation versus just dialing 100 people and hoping mathematics allows you to close 1 out of 10? My job is to make sure whenever you speak a word, it creates the most impact, whether you're the owner or the staff.
I love that. So whatever you're saying has to create an impact on somebody, and that impact then turns into whatever that next step would be. I think that was really succinctly said. Now, I understand that you value cadence over content in a conversation. So please go into that a little more in depth about why you think this way, first of all, and how we can apply this concept to help us get better outcomes.
Yeah, sure. So let's start by establishing what I mean by cadence. And cadence is the back and forth in a conversation. So how much do I talk versus how much you talk? And the value of cadence over content is crucial, and here's why. When you and I speak for the first time, we're really gauging how much time we're going to give one another. As a matter of fact, I've seen some stats say that within the first 8 seconds, you're determining if you're going to give that person the next 2 minutes of your time. So we're constantly judging one another as to how much of our attention we want to give. And the fact of the matter is, if I come on in and I just start blathering about me and my products, I haven't earned that listening on the other person's part. So I can lay out all my content, but if it's on an unreceptive mind, the content doesn't matter. However, if I establish a back and forth with someone and I gain their trust and we gain a certain level of rapport, all of a sudden my content has larger importance in your mind. And here's a great example. One thing I work with companies on is how to do outreach. And the common misconception is that on my first outreach, I should sell my product. The fact of the matter is, on your first couple of outreaches, you should just be asking about that other person. And the more you ask about somebody else, the more it builds in them to want to ask about you. It's called the law of reciprocation. So if I establish a strong back and forth and trust, my content matters. But until then, it's all about cadence.
Yeah, I think that is so smart and such a great way to really go about it. So I've even heard people say the better you are at it asking questions, even if somebody may not even want to buy your product or service, they will.
It's very true. And Ann, it's funny because you can certainly ask questions, but you can also just make statements. Just repeating back a variation on what somebody says can be enough to elicit more information and for them to give you more. I often say that every second in a conversation sets a precedent for the seconds and minutes to come. So the more interest you show, the more they're going to give you, and then eventually they're going to reciprocate and want to know more about you. And at that point, your message is going to be at its peak interest for that other person.
Oh, so cool. Now, you have a theory called the 2-10 rule of communication. So what exactly is this and how does it work?
Yeah, this was great timing, Ann, because this really focuses on the cadence piece that we just discussed. I've traveled all over the world. I've taught in 6 countries. And one thing I found to be the same is that everybody talks about brushing up on your listening skills, but nobody really tells you how to do that. Like, they'll give you little exercises here and there, but there's no hard and fast rules. So I established the 2-10 rule about 10 years ago, and it's based on this. It has been shown that for every 10 minutes you present in or talk to someone, you generate about 2 minutes worth of questions in their mind. And think about how this applies. You go to a talk, and somebody's given some really great information. After about 10 minutes, your brain starts saying, wait a minute, they said this, but I wonder what they meant. And then our brain kind of gets into a stuck mode, right? We keep focusing on that question over and over again. So my premise is that if you present for 2 minutes or speak with someone for 2 minutes, and then you seek an interaction with them, ask them a question, repeat back something they said, just say to them, does that all make sense so far? If you do that every 2 minutes, and then at the end of 10 minutes, use that as kind of a summation point. And you and I have been talking for 10 minutes. God, I just blathered on and on. Let me just stop and make sure and see if we have any questions. So if I can create an interaction every 2 minutes, get a summation at the end of every 10, think about the clarity and the lack of misconceptions, and more importantly, the lack of questions on the listener's end. So my 2-10 rule says, here's some police tape around the timelines. Don't go beyond 2 minutes without interacting. Don't go beyond 10 minutes without opening the floor for questions.
Boy, I think that's really brilliant because so many times, you're right, somebody's talking for a while and your brain starts asking questions, and so you've stopped listening totally because your brain is repeating those questions going, I wonder about this, or why did they say that, or how does that work?
Yeah, and by the time you get to the end of the talk, you think, we've only got 2 minutes left for a question. I'm just going to let mine go. And by then, it's just all too late.
Yeah, absolutely. That totally makes sense. Give me some idea about how you would go about building trust quickly with a potential client.
Sure, and I'll even give you a peek into how I do some of my marketing. Is I reach out with genuine interest. So if I find a group of people or someone that I'm genuinely interested in, the first thing I do is I research them a little bit. What do they do? What's their position? What's their demographic? How long have they been in business? What's their title? so that I can elicit that information and ask them questions when I talk to them. And here's a great real world example. They did a study in England, and I'm not sure how they did this, but they did a study in England and they looked at the question, what are my odds on any given day of finding my soulmate? Well, the statistician found out that your odds are 1 in 356 on any given day. But none of us, Anne, go out and say, okay, I have to meet 356 people today then so I can find my soulmate. We don't do that. We narrow the odds like we do with a customer. We look for an ideal customer profile, and then we do research on that customer. So on that reach out, the best way to start to build that trust is for me, let's say I call you in and you pick up the phone. Instead of saying, hi, how are you? It's going to be, Anne, I am so glad you picked up the phone. I can't tell you how much I was looking forward to talking to you. I've listened to your podcast for ages, and I'm just really excited to get started. How receptive are you going to be to me at that point?
Obviously, very.
Exactly, because it's all about your favorite topic, which is you. Everybody's favorite topic is us, right? So what I want to do is I want to get you feeling comfortable with me before I even introduce me. If I do cold reach outs, Ann, it's not until my 4th reach out that I talk about me. The previous 3 are all about them. You want to build trust, get somebody to talk about themselves and be genuinely interested. There's no better way.
I couldn't agree more. I agree 1,000%. Now, we've talked about the 2-10 rule, and I think I've heard you also talk about, you've said 1 or 2 words can make a big difference in a conversation. Give us examples of what you mean and what maybe those words might be.
Yeah, and this is fascinating because we look at the way words have impact on people, and I think as a general rule as humans, we don't give a boatload of thought to what we're saying. I think we kind of say it, and then we judge how the other person is going to react, and then we react, and sometimes, as you and I both know, we can put our foot in our mouth. Well, social psychologists actually do a lot of studies on the impacts of words and how they affect people. And if you're a business owner, one thing I coach people on all the time is tell people why they should be listening to you or why they should buy from you. The word you want to use is because. And here's why. They did a great study in the copy room of a New York Public Library. What they did was they took interns and they said, I want you to go butt in line to make copies at the copier. Now, Anne, as you may guess, New Yorkers aren't super thrilled about people butting in line, especially when they've been waiting for a while. So needless to say, the interns had very little luck. So the scientist then said, okay, now I want you to go back in and I want you to say because and give a good reason. So I need to butt in line to make copies because my child's in the car, because my wife is waiting for me, because I'm late for work, and see what happens. So they did that, and they found out compliance increased by 60%, or about 60% of people said, okay, you can jump in line. That may not be super fascinating, but here's the fascinating part. They then took the interns and they said, now the reason I want you to use the button line is because you need to make copies. So the intern was supposed to say, I need to jump in line to make copies because I need to make copies. Redundant and obvious, right? You would think that it would have no impact. And yet, what they found was the compliance rate was almost exactly the same. So when you think about how fascinating this is, giving the word because naturally gives another person a reason to accept that behavior. As we grow up in life, we're always asking our parents, why is this? Why is that? Why is the sky blue? Why does a fish not drown in water? So we're always looking for that cause and effect. And because of that, the word because becomes quite a differentiator for us. People want to know the why. So when you're in business, if you are telling someone about a warranty program, or you're telling somebody about a new product, or you're telling somebody that your big season is coming up and they should buy now, give them the because. It will increase compliance by about 60%. And that's just one word, and there's hundreds of them out there.
Yeah, I think I just recently read something, Jake, that talked about using the words you and because more often because it would get you better outcomes.
Exactly right. And you asked for two examples, and the second one is basically the differentiation between a noun and a verb and how just changing those can make a difference. So think about these two sentences. I love dogs and I'm a dog lover. So a change of a noun and a verb. Yet one has greater impact. The dog lover says that I've always loved dogs. I'm going to love them in the future, and I love them now. When I say I love dogs, it's general and vague and is almost transient. So they did a lot of studies on this. What happens if you change those? So instead of I love to paint, I'm a painter, or I like to run versus I'm a runner. And they took it to the voting forum. And one town was not getting the voter turnout they wanted. So they said instead of coming out to vote, they said, this year be a voter. And what they found was they got about a 20% increase in turnout. And the psychological reason is actually kind of simple. We all love to be part of a group. We love to have a purpose. And being a voter is more of a purpose than just coming out to vote. They even found it in kindergartens that instead of helping me clean up, it's better to say, would you like to be my helper? It gives the kids identity and it increases compliance.
Wow. I love that example too, because when you were talking about that, the I love dogs, I thought there's no emotion really. I didn't feel any emotion to the I love dogs. But when you said I'm a dog lover, I thought, oh, I feel emotion with that.
It's amazing because they find this to be almost universal. If somebody says, I love to paint, it's much different than them saying, I'm a painter. You get a much different picture of who that person is and a picture with a greater commitment. Yeah, I've committed to painting. I'm a painter. So it's a simple just switch of a verb to a noun, and it can change perception by people, and that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think all of this actually is super fascinating. I find these stats and I find things that you're saying, just little nuances of things can make a huge difference in how we communicate. And communication obviously is so important in everything that we do. Whether it's with a prospective client, whether it's with our family, peers, we all need good communication skills to have good relationships.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that all the things we're talking about today can not only be used professionally, but they can be used in the dining room as well. So they're just as good for a public speaker as they are for a conversation with a mom or a child or a significant other. These are all universal truths that apply to our communication.
Yeah, absolutely. So give me an idea of what exactly is an adaptive conversational blueprint.
Yeah, it's my degree is in psychology, and I have certifications in neurolinguistic programming, and I got fascinated by the fact that businesses tend to try to sell in the same way. Let me tell you about my product, then let me follow up with you, and let me try for the commitment. But one thing I don't see that often is somebody just listening and adapting on the fly. So here's an example. In neurolinguistic programming, they say to help gain trust, you should not only mirror body movements, but you should mirror what's called a modality with the other person. So are they primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic? And if you can adapt to their style, your message is more likely to get through. They start to see you and them, and a light starts to develop. So what I teach people, my product is the Adaptive Conversational Blueprint, and I teach people how to have a conversation where you literally adapt to their style on the fly. I give you basic principles, rules of thumb, and a way for you to match the style of the person you're talking to, so you become alike, so to speak. And if you see someone that's like you tend to like them more. And if you like them and trust them, chances are you're going to buy from them. So I've used the Adaptive Conversational Blueprint for years, and I've had companies 3x their sales. I've had customer service teams increase their ratings by 1.5 stars. It's a simple process, but it's not intuitive because we're not taught to think this way from birth. We almost need to be reprogrammed a little bit to think in the ways that the blueprint talks about.
So give me an example of adapting to someone's style. What exactly does that mean?
Sure. So let's say I'm talking to somebody who in NLP terms is primarily a visual modality. And what that means is they talk in language that's very visual. So, hey, did you see how blue the sky was? If you say something to them, they might say, hey, I see what you mean. If you give them a concept, they might say, hey, what does that look like? So you can tell that the way they process things is very visual. You might have another group of people who's auditory, who says, hey, I hear what you're saying, or boy, that doesn't sound right, or then you could hear a pin drop. So when I hear that a person's visual or auditory, what I want to start to do is apply that to them. So I may relate to them with my product that my product is super quiet. You won't hear a thing. Or I may say to them, the price of this is something even your budget won't hear. So I want to constantly use language that reflects the auditory. If they're visual, I might want to say, you're going to love the look of this product. It's a gorgeous red. You can't help but notice the contour. So I'd want to use visual language to appeal to the way they tend to think the most. And this may sound difficult, but Anne, if on one of your podcasts you really listen to one of the guests, you'll start to hear it. You'll start to hear the way they use descriptors and you go, oh my gosh, they're really auditory. So I teach people how to get that in the beginning and just start to reframe their language so that they speak in their language.
And the good news for us, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jake, but the good news, as I see it, is most people are visual. So you would have a higher probability to use more visual terms or hear more visual language than you would something else. Isn't that right?
I don't know. I've never looked at the stats behind if there's a certain modality that's the majority of people. I can tell you I am visual, so I like to think everybody's like me. So I would say visual's a good guess, but you can get people who are primarily auditory or even people who are kinesthetic. They love the touch and feel and taste, and it really depends on the person. I don't know if there's any broad sweeping statements we can make in that regard.
I've just heard that in the past, that most
You
people
could be
are visual.
right.
Yeah,
you could be right.
That would at least lend itself to us cueing in more on that type of language versus something else, if you didn't know originally, what they were until you heard them talking.
Yeah, and what I'd like to say to your audience in that regard is some of the things I talk about sound very complex and very difficult, but I want to say that we have the ability to do this, and we did it as kids. If you look at 2 5-year-olds talking to each other, it's an amazing conversation. That's my mom. Which one is yours? I like black. Do you like black? Boy, my favorite is trucks. What do you like to play with? So we have this communication skill going back and forth. And if a kid sees something somebody else likes, they show it off and they like to show it to them and hand it to them so they can touch it and they're not afraid to smell. And it's amazing. Just somewhere along the line, we all lose this ability to really relate to another person's communication style. So as much as this may sound complex, you're going to find it remarkably easy to learn. It's kind of like riding a bike. You just become more attuned to it again, and then you just use it as a way of communicating in default mode.
And it really comes back to also really just paying attention and being present and listening to what people are saying.
Yeah, and the 2-10 rule helps with that as well. If I know every 2 minutes I have to gain an interaction from somebody, or I know that every couple of minutes somebody's going to gain one from me, it makes me want to listen and pay attention. It's kind of like the teacher that calls on everybody, right? You kind of sit in class and you're like, oh, I know my turn's coming. So if you really pay attention and listen to somebody talking, it's amazing what you can pick up. But I think the reality is many of us just talk and then we listen in an effort to talk again.
Yeah, because we're thinking about the next thing we want to say, right?
Precisely.
Yeah. Any other like tips or tricks or business development ideas that you think are important for us to know that we could implement in our business?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is business development. There's a misconception that networking is really the key to getting as many people as possible. And I agree, but I want to just throw in a caveat. Network with a purpose. A lot of business owners I work with, they try to go to every convention and every networking and every meetup that they can, and they find that it's not always the best use of their time. So the suggestion I would make is get what I call your 5. Get the 5 people that are as much invested in your success as you are. And then from each of those 5, just ask for an introduction, because chances are they're going to hook you up with somebody pretty good. And then from that person they introduce you to, ask for another introduction. And what happens is that group of 5 quickly becomes 20. That group quickly becomes 100. That group becomes 1,000. And before you know it, you don't have a network of 10,000 people you barely know. You have a network of 100 people that you know and they know you. And before you know it, they start to spread the word of you. I recently had a business referred to me by some guy I met and taught 15 years ago. So you never know when this is going to come back around. But I guess the bottom line to this, Ann, is network with intention, not the goal of getting 3,000 connections just to say you have 3,000.
Boy, I think that's amazing advice, right on, that we all can take to heart and implement right away. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, Jake, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I'm listed as Jake Stahl on LinkedIn, and you can get in touch with me through my website, which is jakestahlconsulting.com.
Awesome. Any other parting great words of wisdom?
I'm not sure about the great part, but I guess the big thing I would say is a lot of times we forget about the listening piece, which is so crucial. And I just want to emphasize one thing. Listening is an inherent desire we all have. You think back to the caveman days, cave drawings on the walls. We've all wanted to be listened to for thousands of years. So the best part of the piece of advice I can give you is when somebody talks, really focus and listen. And by the laws of reciprocation, they'll want to do the same to you. And maybe you'll develop another one of your core 5.
Oh, wonderful advice. Thanks again, Jake, for sharing your very valuable time with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and again, it was quite an honor.
After investing your very valuable time with Jake and me, I hope that you've gained insights and ideas that will propel you to greater heights in every facet of your life. I salute you for your hunger for more, your drive for wanting to be even better, and your unyielding commitment to being the architect of your destiny. Share the wisdom by passing on my Accountability Coach podcast to help ignite others, which can be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries. And subscribe to the Accountability Minute for daily guidance on proven business success principles, which can also be found on most podcast platforms and in most English-speaking countries, and of course on accountabilitycoach.com. Want more proven business success tips and resources? Well, of course you do. Subscribe to my blog by going to accountabilitycoach.com/blog. And always remember to aim for what you want each and every single day. Until next time, make it a great day. Today and every day. I appreciate you listening.